Kate LaFalter, welcome back to Irish Granny Helen. And where's my little paper? Well, here we go. I'm going to write down. We're on the final video of The Real Marilyn Monroe, video number 21, if you can believe that, by Larry Jordan. This shall be a relatively short video, bringing the whole conclusion to the book. Chapter 62, What the Evidence Shows. It's pretty clear that Marilyn was a bit fickle, and it's also clear that she always rebounded. She was not one to seek long-term, commitments, permanent attachments. She did want children, but when that didn't work out for her, she moved on. She didn't trust any one person to really be there when she needed them, and that obviously is the trauma of her childhood. She showed a lot of courage and resilience. She was courageous in dealing with the studios. She was resilient. Stories about, claims that she was depressed about Fox and her beef with them. Lies. When they would not treat her properly because of that movie, Something's Gotta Give, she packed up and went to New York and started her own production company. She wasn't somebody to sit around and mope and be depressed. And then she held out. She successfully resolved her dispute. She got the role back in the movie. She got her supporting man, Dean Martin, back in the movie. She got like a 500% raise for herself and a better movie deal. And then what they point out here is that no one accidentally takes 64 pills. It's just physically too difficult. You would probably throw up or pass out before you ingested them all, but nobody just accidentally, oh my, oops, I miscounted. Some say that there's no evidence of that, but like no evidence that she didn't. But all you need is common sense. After listening to this book, I know I don't need to be persuasive. Circumstantial evidence is often disparaged. People will say, well, they only have circumstantial evidence. Well, most of the time, they only ever have circumstantial evidence. It's proof of facts that can be inferred. You may not have, like, the smoking gun, but when you can prove that without doubt that somebody was at a particular place at a particular time, for example, it might be circumstantial, but it's still legitimate. Usually, cases have little or no direct evidence. Like I said, the smoking gun is rare. The devil is in the details. So using all the documentation and the interviews, the statements and such, you get a fairly clear picture that emerges. There's an interconnectedness between all of the stories from that night that create a picture of the events. And there is indisputable forensics for those who care to pay attention. And there was extremely suspicious behavior of all the key people. So here are some conclusions, and these are what are in the end of the book. And I'm merely synopsizing the book, and I will use the word allegedly for, So allegedly, the AG, Dr. Greenson, Eunice Murray, and others acted to cause her tragic end. Peter Lawford, allegedly, probably, who knows, an accessory. Pat Newcomb, what did she know? They all committed a crime. You can't argue with that. They concealed what they knew. They lied to the police. That's a crime. They might even have been found guilty in court based on what's called prima facie, which is clear, convincing evidence. But it never got that far. There was gross malfeasance on the part of Chief Parker, Coroner Curfey, D.A. McKesson. Gross malfeasance is the best thing you could say, and as he puts it here, if not criminality. They knew they'd have little hope of winning a conviction of the AG, even if it went that far and there was thorough investigation and indisputable evidence. I mean, you know, power, right? It's been suggested that if he had been tried and put in prison, the assassination would never have happened of the older brother. Greenson got a free pass because that was how they could avoid exposing the AG's role. And Murray clearly was involved in aiding and abetting and was clearly involved, complicit in a cover-up, allegedly. This is all speculation. We're just looking at this as a real-life mystery. So what about these brothers? There's, you know, this has really changed my opinion. It has affected my view. People are complicated. There is more than one side to everybody. We all have our strengths and our flaws. But there's a pattern of treachery and duplicitousness, of mendacious behavior, and a sociopathic disregard for the welfare of others. And it's really shocking when you start hearing private dismissal of bad things to happen to other people, and the ability to go on a fishing expedition the day after Marilyn died and get big pictures taken, family man with wife and children, big grins on their faces, and kind of joke about what happened to Marilyn. Disturbing pictures might develop in the minds of some people. Greenson and Murray, they could have been retaliating. I mean, it can't have been not just passive, not just opportunistic. It might have actually been willful retaliation for being fired. For sure, the AG was paranoid about exposing and damaging his image, exposing what was really going on and his image and his brothers. Lawford has a terrible reputation amongst all these people who knew him and talked about him. So this is what they said, that he was a toady, that he lied, that he, you couldn't trust a word he said, which is really sad because I liked him in that movie Good News with June Allison. Newcomb, they said, same thing. So there was a convergence of common interests, and all the players might have had separate, different interests. Engelberg may have participated with that injection in the afternoon on Saturday. We don't know why that would have happened, but there's clear evidence that something happened that afternoon with him. Greenson's involvement with Marilyn in general as his patient was convenient timing. He was involved very actively in the Communist Party, and he was active in the furtherance of the cause, the protection of it. His role in that party was really significant and very proactive. And there's a lot of suspicion around that and why he was insinuated into her life because of her connections with people in power, hoping for pillow talk to be passed on. He got information about those brothers from her. He took advantage to pass on confidential information that he would get in private therapy. He was so unethical. He had unique status in the party. He was a loyalist. Engelberg, as we know, was also connected. He had all that weird stuff in his hidden library that was whisked away. None of Marilyn's true friends in her close circle liked Greenson. Many thought that his manipulation of her was really her only problem, that she didn't have mental problems. She didn't have psychological problems. She had Greenson problems. He kept bringing up past trauma into the front of her mind, really harping on it and forcing her to face it over and over and over. And he dominated her extremely in a very inappropriate way. He micromanaged her life. He got involved in her career. He was her doctor. That wasn't something that he should have been doing with any kind of professional ethics. Walter Bernstein, one of the screenwriters who worked on Something's Got to Give, sized up Dr. Greenson. He said, quote, "I always felt that she, Marilyn, had become an investment to people like him. An investment not only financially in caring for her, but even in the fabrication of her illness. It had become a need for him and others that she be considered sick, dependent, and needy of him." There was something sinister about Ralph Greenson. As friends close to Marilyn confirmed, late that summer of '62, she was displaying a new assertiveness with people who had been exploiting her and had finally found the courage to dismiss Greenson. Things were coming to a head, in other words. Up to then, the relationship became more troublesome, and it actually became overtly acrimonious. And she had gone back to seeing her former New York City doctor even before she fired Greenson. She was seeing Dr. Hohenberg by phone, having, Zoom calls. Greenson felt resentment and outrage and anger towards Marilyn. And then he told people that he was impatient with her constant complaints. And if your doctor is telling other people randomly that, oh yeah, she's my patient and I'm just sick of her, she's a crybaby, she's a whiner, this is not professional or ethical. Then, and this is just unbelievable, he admitted inappropriate adult feelings for her and being circumspect again. He experienced anger, adult feelings, boredom, sleepiness, restless and uncontrollable laughter relating to her, which he said are all indications of the possibility of countertransference. The shrink needed a shrink. When Marilyn fired him on Saturday, August 4th of 62, Greenson finally was forced to confront the long-feared reality that he would suffer the humiliation of lost status within the Communist Party structure. Their strategy in the party was to burn sources to get rid of them once they had fulfilled their usefulness. With Monroe cutting Greenson out of her life, he may have feared she might disclose the degree to which he had pumped her for information about the brothers. One can imagine him being frantic to prevent that. The other fact that he had met with attorney Rudin and their brothers-in-law. Marilyn had met with Rudin, and Rudin later said that she was in fine spirits. He planned to meet with her again on Monday to rewrite her will. Who would be left out of the will is the big question. She'd had a falling out with the Strasburgs and wanted to reduce the bequest she had made to them. Dr. Chris was going to be out. Marilyn was fuming about the time when Dr. Chris arranged to have Marilyn, unbeknownst to what the plan was, she put Marilyn in Payne Whitney in a locked unit, and she was abused. And Chris was responsible for that. Chris had this weird relationship with Anna Freud. Yes, that Freud. Was helping to fund the Anna Freud Center. And she actually, I'm going to spoil the ending for you here. She did inherit most of Marilyn's estate, and she left it to Anna Freud for the foundation. Greenson and Anna Freud wrote letters confessing manipulating patients to get money for the clinic. And Chris was in on this, Dr. Chris. Greenson was their money man in Los Angeles, and he might have known that Marilyn was going to change her will on Monday, and this would have been another motive. So, you know, who didn't have a motive might be easier to talk about. From February, he knew that she planned to fire him, and Saturday was the last straw because she did fire him. She also fired Eunice Murray and Pat Newcomb. So from February of 60 to her death, Marilyn spent more than $150,000 seeing Dr. Greenson, which today translates into $1.5 million, to go to this abusive creep. So when she fired him, he would have lost that money. He would have lost the cachet of being Marilyn Monroe's doctor. He would have been in hot water with the communists, and he would have lost his direct connection to Fox and the other professional connections it made for him. He'd been also secretly negotiating a biopic with the studio about his own life. And interestingly enough, Fox did make the movie in '63. They called it Captain Newman, M.D. It starred Gregory Peck, Tony Curtis, Angie Dickinson, Robert Duvall, Eddie Albert, and Bobby Darin. Greenson got paid $250,000, the equivalent of $2.5 million today. How did that happen? Some have wondered if that was a payoff by the studio for the psychiatrist helping get rid of Marilyn so Fox could collect the insurance. So there's another motive. I mean, for somebody so kind and unmalicious, sure, a lot of people had motivation. Interesting little fact that would have meant very little at the time, but means more to us today. We are more aware. Greenson had a head injury with frontal lobe damage. What happens when you get frontal lobe damage? His impulse control was gone. This is a form of traumatic brain injury that's suffered by many murderers on death row. People that have this can't control their anger. There's strong implications, strong reason to believe, you know, for example, the black eye that she had from facial injuries, that he hit her. And they hit her when she called him back to her home from Europe, and interrupted his trip, and he was furious by the time he got to LA, and then she suddenly had this mysterious situation. And allegedly, he was the prime suspect, if you want to talk about tampering with an embutol, happening to her stored enema. He was the one who would open up her pills and take out stuff and fool her into thinking she was getting more of a drug than she actually was. So he was already on record as having committed an illegal act that perfectly dovetails with spiking an enema. He later wrote and said things that indicated that Marilyn's death was unfair and unnecessary. So was he coerced into doing something? We don't know. What did he have in mind when he confessed to hurting her? He ended up hurting her, he said. I'm amazed how deeply people seem to be affected by her death. Everybody felt sorry for her, and so many felt guilty. It's a sad, sad story, and it will take me some time to get over it. He told his patient, actress Janice Rule, there's no way in my life I will ever be able to answer any of this. Obviously, that meant that the story the public was told regarding how she died wasn't accurate. Billy Whitfield talked to Greenson on the phone months after her death. He recorded the conversation, and the audio can still be heard on YouTube. The psychiatrist ended the call saying, I can't explain or defend myself without revealing things I don't want to reveal. It's a terrible position to be in, to say I can't talk about it. I can't tell the whole story. Talk to the AG. Milt Evans claimed Greenson made a statement that Marilyn was doomed and eventually she would have done it herself anyway. So what did it matter if this night was the night she died? Rationalization. It may well have been Ralph Greenson acting impulsively on his raw emotions of jealousy and anger after being fired, who compliantly responded to the AG and or Peter Lawford's request that she be sedated before the AG returned, and he took things too far. Then, when Monroe didn't die quite as quickly as they expected and Eunice Murray panicked and summoned an ambulance, he had to rush over and finish the job, as was described by James Hall. Greenson soon traveled to New York to stay with a physician friend of his and said, where I can say certain things in New York, which I cannot say to anybody in LA. And he spent 7 years in therapy with somebody in New York. Murray said, I was never Marilyn's housekeeper. I was her friend. She trusted me absolutely. Now, we know that's crazy. She was spying, at least spying for the communists, certainly setting her up with communists and then ratting on her to the FBI. She set her up with commies and tattled to the FBI and put a bullseye in Marilyn's back for the FBI and the CIA. Oh, that's the other group that was the Mafia, the FBI, the CIA, the AG. There's still, the studio? There was still someone more. Oh my God. So at first, who is this that we're talking about here? I forgot to write the name down, but it's okay. I can find it here. Zolotow. Okay, Zolotow, yet another person, denied that Marilyn and the AG had a relationship, but then admitted it later. Eunice, the same thing. Eunice lied and lied and lied. And then in 85, she went on television and admitted that she lied. And she said it got so sticky that the protectors of the AG, you know, they had to step in and protect him. Whatever that means. Then she denied all of it to Mike Wallace. She was an incorrigible liar. Wallace protected the family, the brothers. And later, as a thank you, I'd forgotten about this, he won the RFK Journalism Award, grand prize. Common sense would say, this is imagine the possibility, allegedly, just imagine, this is just wondering, that the AG made an uninvited visit and had a fight, and it had nothing to do with her death. So probably she was heavily sedated, but when he returned, okay, so that fight happened, but she was still okay. But then she was sedated, as we know the process. She got that shot late in the afternoon and then the enema, with the hopes that he would return. She'd be out cold for a while and he could search. But when he got there, it wasn't enough. She wasn't successfully out cold. And there was a confrontation. And he tried to silence her screaming because she was famous for her scream, and used a pillow, and it went too far. She was already in a depressed state respirations-wise in her system, her respiratory system, so partially suffocating somebody might not be partial if you're already so terribly drugged. She was held down till she was unconscious. And the big question is, was this an accident or was this intentional? Lots of speculation. We're not alleging anything. We don't know. Otash describes the audio of her screaming, the AG stifling her, silence, and then he leaves in a rush. He returned later in his limo to sit outside and supervise what happened in the house afterwards, allegedly called a cover-up. Iannone, stayed, and he got others in the police goon squad to show up. At that point, Dr. Greenson, the AG, and Lawford fled together and got pulled over. Otash bugged Marilyn for Hoffa and heard the final confrontation and describes it as what he considers a suffocation. And that would leave very few signs. I mean, that can happen with no real outward signs at all. Oh, and it would take 2 people to do it successfully. Postmortem appearance in the case of suffocation typically includes cyanosis, deep purple or purple-red color of the head, neck, and upper chest. She had that. As Cyril Wett pointed out, when a body has a bluish color, the cause of death is likely to be other than by oral overdose of a drug. Quote, a rapid loss of oxygen causes deprivation and death to the skin cells, explaining the discoloration of the skin. Wecht admitted, you're right, suffocation can occur from somebody holding a pillow over somebody, and actually one does not rule out the other. You can have drugs, and it would be easier to suffocate someone with a pillow who is under the influence of central nervous system depressing drugs. A forensic pathologist who studied her case but did not want to be identified said, quote, is that theoretically, physically possible? Yes. Suffocation is something that can be done, and very likely every practicing forensic pathologist in the history of his or her lifetime career may have missed a case of suffocation where it's just not been suspected. No markings of any kind to indicate any kind of a struggle, no bruises around the lips and the gums or anything like that. Certainly, that is a possibility. So in order to do it successfully, you would have to cover somebody's face so they couldn't breathe, but also compress their chest, which causes certain kinds of bruises. She had those bruises, but it would take 2 people. Hall said, this is the EMT guy, that there were no typical signs of overdose at her death scene. The fan Haspiel talked in this book about Madonna on Saturday Night Live, acting this scenario out. And he said, well, welcome to reality, people. Her true friends agree that this is exactly what happened. They all allege that it was foul play. The consensus was that she met with foul play. Burl Ives said, Marilyn Monroe and I knew each other very well, and I can tell you this, all of us, those of us who knew her, knew that she had been murdered. Ralph Roberts was undoubtedly the most credible witness to have seen Marilyn that last day. He said it would be easier for him to believe that she had done it herself, but I don't. Pausing and dropping his head, he said slowly, for emphasis, I think somebody done her in. Her grandmother tried to smother her as a baby. And as an adult, she feared sleep. Now, she took pills to stay asleep. She didn't have trouble going asleep. She woke up with night terrors from the trauma of what happened to her as a child. She didn't like to use a pillow. She had an obsession about being suffocated by a pillow in her sleep. In Ralph Roberts' private notes, he recalled conversations with her about her fear of being smothered. During the summer of '61, as he was giving her a massage, she said, I'm not afraid of heights, but I do have a phobia of suffocation. He thought this was very significant. She talked about it several times, and he wrote it down. So, why? One has to ask why. Then we have this exclusive tidbit exclusive to this book. Shortly before Eunice Murray died in '94, she was in the hospital. Someone whose identity is known to this author visited her for the last time, and Marilyn Monroe's death was briefly discussed. Eunice exclaimed, they shot her. That sounds like Murray was senile and confused, except an injection is often referred to as a shot, and that may have been what she meant. Could Mrs. Murray have been referring to the heart needle that ambulance attendant James Hall said Ralph Greenson used on Marilyn? So far as it's known, she was not physically present in the cottage, Eunice, when that happened, but she may have witnessed a hot shot being given to Monroe earlier. Either way, on her deathbed, Murray was confirming that somebody did something to take Marilyn's life. Chapter 62, Respecting Her Memory or Not. Miller, in 64, Arthur Miller, her ex, produced After the Fall, and it's not a nice portrait of Marilyn. Joe DiMaggio said, I'll beat him up if our paths ever cross, meaning Miller. He was very upset about this play. Jackie, this is interesting, Jackie turned on Miller for his betrayal of Marilyn. He called her a self-destructive slut and that he had abandoned her for her own good. Haspel has been fact-checker and has defended her. He said he got sick of the mythological Marilyn. There's no reference to the Marilyn Monroe I knew. None. She was a decent person. This is from Haspel. She was just a lovely, sweet, ethical, moral person in real life. She was somebody that if you knew her, you wanted things about her to also be about you. The public's admiration, adoration, love of this woman rises above anything ever written about her. Somehow instinctively, people know better. As she herself said, those who know me better know better. James is greatly dismayed by the popular assumption that Marilyn Monroe did this to herself. He observes, quote, "It's sad that people who claim to love her want to think that she did this. I don't know why anybody would love somebody and want to see them as being that sad and that desperate." He theorizes that people invent their own versions of her so they can relate to her. Quote, "It's a way of identifying with somebody because you on some level in your own life feel the same thing. You understand what I'm saying? It's an identification thing." They need to think of Monroe as somebody who would do this because they themselves have felt that way. It reveals more about these fans than it does about Marilyn. And in the book, he talks a bit about Haspel and Haspel's life as it progressed before and after Marilyn. And I decided that it was difficult to synopsize it. There's a ton of detail. And I had to leave you a little something to surprise you when you buy the book and read it. So it's not 100% germane to actually the outcome of what happened to her. He left home when he was 15. He had an abusive mother. He was homeless for a while. He lived in a cheap hotel, drifted back from hotel to hotel. It's a story of poverty and struggle. He delivered telegrams for Western Union, and he used to throw away the telegrams for the New York Communist Party. He'd be given them to deliver, and he'd throw them out. He said, I was never dirty. He had no education. He never went to high school. He started as a stock boy and worked his way up to manager of the Hollywood Film Company. And his whole story is absolutely moving. Marilyn was an orphan, and she had an affinity for orphans. Well, she was put in an orphanage, let's put it that way. She had an affinity for orphanages. She went out of her way to know all about him. She really took a liking to him. He was brash, a brat with her. He even once told her to go to hell, but she actually appreciated that he treated her like a real person and not like an idol or something. He always told her the truth, even if it was unflattering. And she took it, He wasn't a stalker. They became friends. They went to breakfast together. He was invited to her house. He was asked by her to go shopping with her. They wrote back and forth. There are letters where she said, I miss you. He respected her. And in this relationship, she had the power. He wasn't manipulating her or glomming onto her. They just had an interesting relationship. Unconventional how they met, you don't usually meet a star and become a close friend, but that is what happened. Joe DiMaggio was a stalker, allegedly, according to Haspel. He spied on her. He lurked around her house. He lurked when she was at that Calneva Lodge. He was up on the hillside staring down at her at the pool. Dr. Chris treated him free of charge for a while in New York, and he finally figured out, did Marilyn pay for that? She treated him free of charge. That's unusual. Marilyn looked out for him. She refused to ever let him pay. Once he finally was earning a little bit of money, and they got into a taxi to go someplace, and when they got there, he handed the taxi driver $1, which paid for the bill at the time, and she grabbed it and stuffed it down the front of his shirt and told him never do that again. His phone number, he said, was not in her address book. People sometimes point to this to show that he wasn't really a friend. He said, well, my number wasn't in her book because I got my first phone the week before she died. He never had a phone. Couldn't afford it. Interestingly, Marilyn Monroe was in the New York phone book for years and years, but she didn't list her name as Marilyn Monroe, like Monroe, comma, Marilyn. She listed it as Marilyn, comma, Monroe, and nobody knew who it was, which is hilarious. He said, without makeup, she was infinitely more beautiful. And, you know, I hate that, you know, things always end up talking about her body, her weight, her appearance, blah, blah, blah. But there's something here that's interesting. He said, I've never seen a movie, I've never seen a still photograph that is as beautiful as she was in person. Maybe that's because I loved her that much, or maybe it's because she was that beautiful. To me, without makeup, she was beautiful. I think because her face was so beautiful and real, without the makeup. The eyebrows were there, the eyelashes were there, the flawless skin was there, the perfect teeth. She was just drop dead gorgeous. The only flaw in her face, this is interesting, was the down on her cheeks because it was noticeable, you know, little tiny white hairs. And I finally realized, I thought, well, it captures the light, and that's why she's so bright in pictures. She didn't shave it off because initially I thought, why doesn't she just shave that? And it became an immediate flaw that dissolves into not being a flaw. So he corrected a number in the book. There's discussions of people who were mistakenly identified as Marilyn Monroe, doing things, being places, being with other people, and he said that it was mistaken IDs often. There were people who looked very much like her who were mistaken for her at times, and sometimes trying to look like her, but she said that was all lies. He especially was disgusted by fraudsters who claimed knowledge of her or an association with her and faked that there were relationships. It really annoyed him. He says, you know, big media, they're not interested in the truth. What they're really interested in is money. He underscores that she was not a vindictive person. He says she did one thing early in her career and never did it again. Some catty newspaper woman had commented negatively about a gown that Marilyn wore, and somebody said to Marilyn about that woman, if I were you, I would have scratched her eyes out. And Marilyn said, I thought it was crueler to leave her face exactly the way it was. He says he liked Paula Strasberg, that she was actually fabulous, and he did not like Lee, and that's where the real problem in that relationship, that dynamic existed. He said Lee was weird. He was remote and weird. Lee boxed up Marilyn's underwear and sent it to the Salvation Army to avoid them being auctioned off. Remember, they inherited all her stuff. Lee was not honorable about giving her personal effects to the friends and family as she requested. He hoarded them, and he made millions from auctioning them off eventually. According to James, of major historic importance is that Strasbergs told him they had letters that the older brother, had written to Marilyn that they had put them in a safety deposit box that would not be opened for 50 years. What is this secrecy? With Paula and Lee being dead, I would wonder if anybody even knows where that safety deposit box was. It could have been just something that was opened by a bank and discarded. You read about other people who have done the same kind of thing. Lee Weiner, for instance, took photographs of Marilyn's corpse that he put in a safety deposit box that have never been seen, and nobody knows where the box is. And Paula was grief-stricken, he said, after Marilyn died. So, moving to chapter 63, Corsum Perficio. If you remember, that's the Latin phrase that many houses had outside the door that meant the end of the road. This is where I found my home, basically. The journey ends here. When new people bought the house, the Nunez family, her stuff was still in it. They didn't care about it being Marilyn Monroe's house. Dr. Nunez, who bought it, was a Mexican immigrant, and the house reminded him of home because it had such a Spanish style to it. He bought the house sight unseen. I didn't know there was stuff in there. Items had been removed by family and friends first. Pat had gone in and taken things. Interestingly, the family of Nunez, who bought the house, they believe Marilyn was murdered. This guy's a doctor. He says, come on, 64 pills. Okay, chapter 64. I thought that I actually wrote down. Isn't this interesting? Chapter 64, the final words. Richard Merriman, the Life magazine reporter that had talked to her, said she was far smarter than her public image. Near the end, he said she's absolutely gorgeous in the photographs that I took and so intelligent in recorded interviews. People simply did not know. There's a couple of pages in the chapter of the previous chapter about the house and the layout and that, maps and discussions of what room is where, what furniture was left. And I thought I'd leave that to you when you read the book after you buy it. Pat Newcomb said everyone who knew Marilyn in the last year knew, now this is Pat Newcomb, knew she was in about the best physical shape of her life. She was also in a positive mood, except for some small things. Now this dovetails with what Ralph Roberts also observed. Maureen Stapleton said, I'm sick of people dancing on that poor girl's grave. But there's too much money to be made from sensational lies, and the truth is often ignored, and the movie-going public to date has spent $2.8 billion to watch her movies. It's the author's theory that aside from her incandescent screen presence, one reason for people's enduring fascination with her is they know instinctively her future was stolen from her. This brilliant light was extinguished by dark forces without there being any accountability for those who brought it about. And she was, let's see, she handled fame with honesty or silence. She rarely replied to criticism. Most people really don't know me, she's been quoted as saying several times. What's important, she said, is how you feel about yourself, not how other people feel about you. On her career, she said, it was the creative part that kept me going, trying to be an actress. I enjoy acting when you really hit it right. And I guess I've always had too much fantasy to be only a housewife. Hey. Also, she said, I had to eat. I was never kept, to be blunt about it. I always kept to myself. I've always had a pride in the fact that I was my own. Self-supporting. I've always felt towards the slightest scene, even if I had it all to do in a scene, was just to come in and say hi, that the people ought to get their money's worth and that this is an obligation of mine, to give them the best you can get for me. I'm one of the world's most self-conscious people. I really have to struggle, she said. And at the same time, she said, being such a public figure, she said, I had a great need for aloneness. And then finally, the book ends with a comment from Army Archer to Variety Magazine. August 6, 1962, the final words: Marilyn was late for everything, but much too early for death. So, fabulous book. Such an interesting person, and there is nothing better than finding a book this gripping, just full of detail after detail that blows your mind and dispels preconceived notions you had about people, good and bad. I had good impressions about some of the main players in this book, and now I'm very sad that my heroes had clay feet. And Marilyn Monroe, to me, was just another blonde actress, you know. I really regret feeling that way, and I am kind of obsessed with her now. I'm just fascinated by her. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I know that it was entertaining for a lot of people. I hope it wasn't too onerous that we've taken so many weeks to cover it. It kind of took over the Saturday book for a while. I really enjoyed it, and I don't regret a minute of it. And I know that an awful lot of you really enjoyed it. And we will be going on to other things in the following weeks. But we are going to speak with Larry Jordan, and on Substack, behind the paywall, I'm going to do what I used to always do about the topic of books. And then Deborah Lupien and I are going to get together and confer and ask questions. So I invite you to join us. I feel like I'm pressuring people. I just desperately want people to understand that we're continuing what we've always done. I'm continuing what I've always done, and so is Deborah. We're just being a little more underhanded about it. So this next week will be hard, and I just encourage everybody to stay strong. And I will be recording with Kim Carey on Monday, the day of infamy. Hopefully we'll be able to raise everybody's feelings about it. By the time you've watched these videos on Marilyn, I'm hoping that I will have had a successful record. I never count 100% on the technology, but I'm watching the clock here because I have a scheduled appointment to speak with Heather, our wonderful returning guest from Canada, who had the near-death experience, and thinking it's going to be a fun conversation with Heather. And so thank you. Thank you all so much for subscribing. If you enjoyed this book, consider donating to PayPal to the book fund. And when you do, you get your name in the drawing, and I have to do that. That's one of the things I have to do here very soon. I'm delayed. And I actually have a lot of books on controversial topics that I'm very willing to give away. So if we have covered something over the past couple of years and you might be interested, let me know. I'll do a book drawing, and if a lot of people didn't claim their books when I did the book drawings, so I'm still sitting on piles of books, and it kills me to give them away to Goodwill. So let me know. Thank you very much. Make sure you're subscribed. The subscriptions and the thumbs up button help to put this information out there for more people. And oftentimes there's mysterious declines. And I often say my subscriptions are like, the chart of my subscriptions look very much like a very poor EKG. They up and down and up and down. No rhyme or reason. I did lose some subscribers, a couple hundred, when I changed the nature of my channel a little bit. And that's okay. I think people came for a particular reason and have decided they're not getting that here. But really you are. You're getting the benefit whether you know it or not. So thank you for watching. Check out Ask Your Irish Granny on Substack. There's a public place and there's a Behind the Great Wall of Irish Granny that is more private stuff. And you're welcome to join us there, or you're welcome just to enjoy the opinions and nonsense and responses to questions. Not getting enough questions. I've got to make things up. Opining, giving opinions, because I don't have questions. So please, I invite you to join me. And until then, slán go fóill, slánte.